Well, the first question here today, Bob, to our guests
Here it
is,
comes.
where were you in 1974? Sparky Markey?
1974, I was in Columbus, Ohio.
And how old were you at that time?
I was a energetic 22.
22 in 1974. Did you have girlfriends?
Probably.
Oh, yeah, that's a
Where
silly
were you
question.
going?
Of course he did.
Too long ago to remember. Rick, 1974?
I was in Elta, Iowa.
And you were how old?
10.
Did you have girlfriends?
Not at 10.
10.
He was 10?
Wow. Mr. Pope?
1974, I would have been a junior in high school at Sutton, Nebraska. The
Right
Sutton
on, dude.
Mustangs.
Right on.
There you go.
Oh,
Yeah.
dear.
Studying as hard as I possibly could, you know,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Well, knowing that you was going to have all these responsibilities later on.
You had to. A lot of preparation.
All right, actually we have Sparky Markey here from NPPD. How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Rick Nelson, Custer Public Power.
Good morning, Dave.
And Pat Pope, who is the top dog, head man, the key guy with NPPD.
The big target.
Yeah, I suppose.
That's where the buck stops, right?
And Rick, you, thanks for bringing the guys in. It's always a lot of fun. What topics did we want to touch upon today?
Oh, we're going to touch on a variety of topics, but how about we start off? Pat always, when he starts a meeting, talks about system status and generation. So why don't we start off with that, Pat, if you want to talk a little
Yeah,
bit about
and,
what's going on in real time?
Everybody, when they got up this morning, probably first thing, looked at that thermometer and saw lots of negative signs. And so I think we were all very happy our energy resources were there to keep us warm, and I like to look at where's that energy coming from right now. And on the NPPD internal website, we actually have a little pie graph that shows us at the instant where our energy is coming from. And there's not a lot of wind out there this morning. So starting off with wind, we're only getting right now about 1.1% of our energy from wind. The real workhorses for us right now, 63.3% of our energy coming from coal, and the other big workhorse is our nuclear station, almost 34% of our energy coming from nuclear. So, you know, it's important to point out that even though renewables have a niche, we might all be shivering a little bit right now if we didn't have these other energy resources to help us run the system, and that's the importance of being diversified.
Absolutely.
And that you can look at that any time?
Yeah.
That's pretty
Yeah, we
neat.
look at it all the time, and you know, it is and there are times when, you know, we will see 18, 19, maybe 20% of our energy coming from wind, you know, but it's got to be a fairly windy day, and of course then you can have situations where you get too much wind, and the turbines are programmed to shut down to make sure they aren't damaged by any of the torques and stresses that come with that.
So in the event that we get a wind situation this afternoon, that backs off the other supplying aspects of it?
Well, it depends on what the load does. You know, these things are all interrelated because we have to match our generation to load on a second-by-second basis. And so one would expect that as the day goes on, we'll see some load build. You'll have schools starting up, businesses starting up, and if we did get more wind, that would help fill that gap of requirement of generation. If we don't, it'll be these other resources that'll have to be notched up a little higher to carry that load.
And they analyze that how often?
Constantly.
Just constant.
It truly is a second-by-second analysis that goes on at our Donovan Control Center. Since we can't store electricity, we have to use it the very instant that it is generated. And that is no small feat when you're, you know, the interconnected grid across the United States is literally the largest machine in the world. It truly is, because if you look at it, all the substations, all the transmission lines, all the generators, all of the load, that is a machine, and it's absolutely huge.
And it's intimately related to the demand. The production and the demand have to be in perfect balance.
That's right. And if your resources can't respond quickly enough, you can find yourself in trouble too. You know, we can have, I know one of the loads that is always fun for us to deal with on the NPPD system is the Nucor steel plant in Norfolk, Nebraska. They melt steel by sticking a great big electrode into a vat full of scrap metal and creating a short circuit. Their load can go from 0 to 100 megawatts, which is the output of one of our units down at Sheldon Station in an instant, you know.
Do they notify you that they're getting ready to do
They do.
this?
We
so
work,
you can kind of anticipate it?
we work very closely with the operators there at Nucor.
Well, we went through an experience here in Broken Bow, and Dave, you were there firsthand in when we had to reduce the load so they could make some repairs within the city of Broken Bow. And watching the impact that businesses shutting down unneeded electrical demand, major businesses in the area shutting down, BD really shut down, and it made a significant difference. And Dave, you watched as the load decreased.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating, you know, at a local level, Pat, because they knew they had to get down to a certain level of demand to be able to switch and make some improvements here in town. You probably may even be familiar with this activity, but we had to get on the radio and shout out to the businesses and so forth there, you know, if you got anything else you can turn off, please do that. And the school called and they said, you know what, we can go up and shut off some things up at the North Park School. And as people worked together, they actually brought it down below the level that they needed it to have to be able to make the switch. So you really can make a difference turning off things you don't really need.
You can, and we have gotten kind of spoiled
Yeah.
by the reliability and the low cost of our energy supply. There's no doubt about that. So,
You know, Rick and I have talked a lot about energy conservation, things you can do in the home to reduce the amount of electricity. This was a prime example of everybody working together to reduce the amount of consumption of electricity for that very important operation.
one of the challenges that we have in the state when it comes to energy efficiency, because I always think that as public power suppliers, we have kind of a solemn duty to our customers to help them use our product as efficiently as they can. But quite frankly, our prices are low enough that a lot of times the payback isn't necessarily there. If you get into a location like California or some of the states that have sky-high energy prices, Long Island, for example, you'll see folks do lots of energy efficiency. I know Long Island right now has a huge push for rooftop solar. And the big reason is to avoid the high charges from the utility.
Yeah, but we're talking 20, 25 cents kilowatt hour.
Very high, yes, very high.
Well, so common that's the case, money drives so many things. If it's really gonna save me some money, I'm gonna consider doing it.
That's right.
Is it, this is just an open request, Mr. Pope.
Yes.
When they brought up nuclear, those guys high-fived one another, and I just don't think I don't see any sense in that. No help on solar here whatsoever with those guys over there.
Well, you know, the fact of the matter, Dave, I'm sorry to give you this little reality check here,
Okay.
but, you know, if we are ever going to truly decarbonize the electric utility sector, nuclear will have to play a role. There's just no way that renewables can fill the entire bill. This morning is a good example of that. Even if you had solar spread out all over the sand hills, and can you imagine the pushback that we'd get on doing something like that, it still would not fill the bill. The nuclear plant has what we call the highest concentration of energy. When you look at the number of acres, I think our Cooper Nuclear Station sits on 640 acres down at Brownville, and the amount of energy we get out of that compared with how much land would be tied up for other types of resources, wind, for example, or solar, there's really no comparison.
It's clear that you and I went separate ways in
Yes, we did.
1974.
Yes, we did. But there's still hope for you.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that those sorts of things, the points you made are perking people's ears up out there because you know, the use of land is a very debatable
It is.
deal.
And you think about, I'm finding it very amazing to watch this debate unfold about hydrocarbons and global warming and whatnot, and how much of the hydrocarbon resources should theoretically stay in the ground if we're to avoid an X degree increase in temperatures, and it's huge. You know, they talk about leaving all the coal in the ground, they talk about leaving all of the crude oil in the ground, natural gas, even though it's cleaner, it still produces CO2, so it's not a magic fuel. But yet on the other hand, probably one of the biggest drivers in our economy right now is the energy business, the recovery, refining, and distribution of those hydrocarbons. And our society is absolutely dependent on energy, everything we do. And so how our society reconciles this without having a cohesive policy around non-emitting, is what I call them, resources like nuclear, I think it's going to be a challenge.
It comes down to the S word, doesn't it?
The S word.
Storage. I mean,
Storage is the holy grail. You know, when you think about what would make renewables much, much better, it is storage. And in fact, I can tell you right now that one of my next projects at NPPD will be, and we might have talked about this in the past, of NPPD having the rights to a depleted natural gas field out in western Nebraska that we could use to store compressed air. We would use off-peak cheap energy at night, whether that comes from wind or what have you, and we would actually compress air into this underground facility. And then during the day, when we really need that energy, when the demand is up, we would release that energy out of the ground, run it through a combustion turbine setup, and produce energy. So that's something that we're looking very closely at, but there again, very dependent upon the geology that you happen to have. Another form of energy storage, which is actually a pretty good high efficiency, is pump storage hydro, where you pump water. It's like your traditional hydroelectric dam, except that the equipment can not only make electricity when the water runs through the dam, but you can also reverse that process and pump the water from a lower reservoir up into the upper reservoir during the nighttime hours or when the wind is blowing to store that energy. But there again, very dependent upon the geology or the geography that you might have. So.
should interrupt the program at this time to apologize to you for it's getting a little warm and hot in here, Mark, and I know that you're very susceptible to that, but the problem that we have is we are connected with Rick's Electricity, and he has some special rates for us that cause us to run our heat just a little bit hot, so I apologize for that.
So it's basically Rick's doing.
I thought you were going to talk about all the hot air. In this
Well, there we go. That felt a bit more good. Pat, I'm curious. Do you think, and this is probably just be an opinion thing, the concern over carbon in the atmosphere, and you know, there's this big argument about global climate change, probably a better term.
Right.
Is it being overblown? Is it? What is your opinion on that? Are we hearing too much from one side of the issue to make a solid decision?
If you step back from that particular issue and just look at what our species kind of has a habit of doing, regardless of the issue, many times we as a species, or mankind, however you want to call us, have a tendency to overhype things. And you can go back and you can look at a lot of issues that we've had. I remember the predictions at the end of the 90s when the Y2K issue was going to come about. You know, you had people prepping for doomsday, and it was going to be an absolute disaster, and nothing happened. There's something, we're wired somehow psychologically as a species, and I think that there's a part of us that kind of enjoys making the worst out of situations. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't global warming, and I'm certainly not saying that man isn't necessarily having an impact on this. And I'm all for, regardless of what the pollutant is, generating electricity as cleanly as we possibly can. but I've also got a responsibility to provide energy that our customers need at an affordable price. So it's a real balancing act. And so I suspect that, we'll be long gone, and somebody will be analyzing how mankind reacted to whatever we want to call it, and I suspect that, as the old adage goes, things are never as bad as you thought they were, nor are they as good as you thought they were.
Yeah.
So,
I had a fifth grade school teacher that she was a very basic, person, and then she taught us one thing. She's a couple different things, but one of them was one saying that we probably heard every day was waste not, want not.
mm-hmm.
And so even if you take that debate, are we doing things properly? Are we affecting the earth? Many people think we are. I happen to be one of those that think man just affects everything it touches. But when it comes down to it, it's the waste not, want not, the general good principle that the fifth grade teacher was trying to teach us to do the right thing and not waste things that we don't have to waste.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
And Pat, another aspect of that, and Rick and I have talked about this before, even if the United States really got good at reducing carbon, but China over here is going great guns, as is
Yeah.
India.
Yeah,
When you're talking about a global situation,
in which it truly is.
it is, and so we've got to get cooperation
That's
between
right.
all the producers of these hydrocarbons.
There was a really good article the other day, I believe it was in New York Times, that I sent out to my senior staff that talked about China and just looked at the numbers and the amount of CO2 that they could still emit. And I'm talking about the growth in emissions before they would hit any of these caps. That is a huge issue, there's no doubt about it. But then on the other hand, one of the best ways to fight poverty, and we certainly don't have a lack of poverty around the world, is to provide energy to people. There is a direct correlation between a nation's gross domestic product and its electricity consumption. They're linked. You just look around this studio right now and look around town. Everything that we use is electrified.
it sure is.
So,
And we're so insecure, we have streetlights.
Oh, don't start that.
Yeah, you guys love this.
Pat,
Listen
you
to
want-
this, Sparky. What would happen if we shut off all the streetlights? We don't need streetlights. Can't you see where you're going? You got headlights in your car, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sparky,
If somebody's gonna break into your house, they're probably gonna use a flashlight so you can see them.
This is just a little rampage he's gonna go on. It'll be over in a minute. He's the guy that keeps telling me, hey, Dave, the light out here is not working. You need to call the city and see if they can
I
fix
just
that.
pointed out that it was not working. I didn't have any trouble walking from the parking lot into the building.
Okay,
Does not need the light.
let's switch gears for a moment. Get a little bit more on a Nebraska level. Sparky, is it called the R project?
Our project.
Let's talk a little bit about that, or Pat.
Yeah.
I happened to read an article in the Omaha World Herald from the Game and Parks, or from the
Fish and Wildlife?
Fish and Wildlife, and they were not favorable as to what you guys have lined out. You want to comment on that real quick?
Well, probably the one thing that we strive the hardest for whenever we build a transmission line is to look at all the factors. If anybody thinks that in a day or so we grab a map and we throw a dart at point A and throw a dart at point B and say, okay, here's where we're going, they need to come and spend the months and months and years that our team goes through analyzing all of the different facets of line routing, all of the comments that we take from landowners and stakeholders along the way. We tabulated the other day that we spent over 3,500 man-hours in public involvement processes just on the R project. And so what I recommend folks look at, and particularly regulators and particularly policymakers, is to ask the question, what's the integrity of the process? How thorough is the process in determining the best line route? Because number one, we need the line. I mean, we can show you all sorts of studies. We've had the issues up in what we've called Zone 5 back in 2012 when we didn't have enough capacity to serve the irrigators. I was talking to Rick on the way in. I was lamenting a little bit, and and don't beat me up for this, but I was kind of hoping for some snow this weekend because in Columbus, we're kind of dry. And we need some more moisture. And I worry again, are we going to have a dry summer because of all of the moisture that's gotten dumped on the East Coast? And what will that mean for irrigation service? And so we need the line, there's no doubt about that. And then you need to ask yourself, is the organization really using best practices in the process? And you know, I will hold our process up to anybody's process in the world when it comes to soliciting input. Now, at the end of all that, you still have some folks that aren't happy because, you know, maybe that line route, the preferred line route, is close to them in some way, shape, or form, or impacts them some way, shape, or form. And what I always tell people is that, well, you can move the line willy-nilly, and quite frankly, I'm a little disappointed in Fish and Wildlife because they've not gone through the process that we've gone through. I'm sure they've got expertise in fish and wildlife issues, but I think that we've got as much and more expertise on all the factors that come into play here. You'll just simply end up having another set of folks impacted. You know, there's no way of ever building a facility. Whatever man does, as you said earlier, Dave, everything man does impacts the earth we live in, the landscape we live in. So we need to assure ourselves that we've got a good process in place.
On the political side, is there any concern? They just released this yesterday, the day before, on the pipeline situation, the
Eminent domain?
eminent domain
Yeah.
issue that the judge ruled on. Is
No, and I think that's, to be honest with you, I think there's a whole different set of issues that are wrapped up into that. So this line is being built for Nebraskans, by Nebraskans. It will benefit Nebraskans. This is about as go big red Nebraskan as you can really get. This has nothing to do with moving oil across international boundaries and everything else. This is pretty basic bread and butter. We need electricity to continue to do our business in this state. NPPD has been charged by the legislature. We were created by the legislature to do that. And we think that we're pretty well equipped to do that and work pretty darn hard to work with all the folks that are impacted.
Well, you've certainly had a number of meetings, Mark, you've been involved in a lot of those, where you've given people the opportunity to come and take a look and make some comments and so forth, but as Pat mentioned, you're never going to have everybody happy about it. I think the alternative route that the Fish and Wildlife suggested was coming back to the south this way a little bit.
Yeah.
It would be easy to, on you guys' behalf, it'd be easy for me to just say, well, that'd be cool if they just move it, but all of the time, money, and planning that's been put into this, they can't really disregard that, I would think.
I sat through a presentation a few weeks ago. I think it was maybe our January board meeting. And all of these factors, and it was a good presentation because it had a lot of maps.
Yeah.
I'm a simple guy. I like to see pictures.
Yeah, me
You know,
too.
Put it in pictures. And it really contrasted where the preferred route was going and how we were going to avoid certain things versus some of the other suggested routes, and how, quite frankly, where that was going to put us right in the middle of some other issue that we were trying to avoid. And so rest assured, the team that is working on this has gone through every combination of factors to try and it is a balancing act. There's no doubt about it, because there are a lot of competing efforts or competing issues here. So
And I've sat through some of these routing meetings where the team's been in. And it's not in a half an hour we've got a line route. It's like several days of looking back at information where you're actually sitting here going, wait a minute, wasn't this an issue over here? And he goes back, starts looking at that material and says, that's right, let's take another look at this. So it's not done, as Pat said, willy-nilly.
we took over 2,400 comments from the public, and I can assure you every single one of those comments was considered. Now, for those folks that submitted a comment that we didn't end up acting on, are they going to be happy? Probably not. I can appreciate that. We spent 3,500 man-hours, as I said earlier, working on these public events. a couple of, I'll call them rumors or maybe impressions that I think it's important to clear up. There seems to be this thought that the Nebraska Power Review Board, who we do have to get approval from for a line like this, has the power to order us to go on a different route. They do not. The Nebraska Power Review Board looks at whether there is a true need for the project, whether there are duplication of facilities, those types of things. They do not get involved in the routing in any way, shape, or form. The environmental aspect of it, there is an environmental impact statement that is being produced for this project. First time that we've ever gone to a full-blown environmental impact statement. We've done environmental assessments for projects, but because of the size of this project, over 220 miles of line and everything else, we're doing a full-blown environmental impact statement. Even that does not tell you that you've got to move a line or route a line here or there. It tells you how to mitigate any of the impacts that you might possibly have, whether it's wetlands, endangered species, what have you. So, with all due respect to Fish and Wildlife, they don't have, quote-unquote, the statutory authority to force a reroute.
Force that reroute. So, in your mind then, if there's no more surprises out there, and I suspect in your business you
Every
get
day.
ready for some.
Every day.
What's the timeline here in your mind?
Well, we'd like to begin construction in 2017, and we'd like to have that completed in late 2018. So, but as you say, you know, we do have a process in this country, and one never knows exactly what you may run up against.
Yeah, you had 2,400 concerns. Could you give me an example of what is a concern that a person might have regarding the route of a power line?
Sure.
I can't see, if I'm looking out my front window, I don't even see that as all that ugly, having a line go through. What might be an example?
A lot of times it's proximity, whether it's proximity to your farmstead, for example, or your feed lot, or maybe you've got a pivot. One thing that has changed over the years, back in the day, and this is probably back in the 60s, we actually had the ability to go diagonally across the property. And we did. My predecessors did build lines diagonally across property, and then all of a sudden here comes the pivot industry, and that causes all sorts of hate and discontent and problems, and so the legislature passed a law prohibiting that, and so today we don't do that. We're on the section lines, half section lines, quarter section lines, and so we work with customers to mitigate any of those types of concerns typically on a location. Maybe there's a shelter belt. I planted that shelter belt 15 years ago,
Sure.
and it's providing great shelter for my calves and whatnot, and I don't want you tearing that out. Well, that becomes a comment, and that's a valid type of a thing that gets considered in there. So.
How do you address the, I know one of the ones that we heard about from the press was the worry about the land erosion in the sandhill area where you would put the posts. And I assume you have some sort of a plan for that.
We do, and in fact, we've actually engaged an expert from the University of Nebraska. You can rest assured that the district would do everything in its power to mitigate any impacts and to ensure that we don't leave areas that are going to suddenly turn into big blowouts. When we were flying in here today, I have to be honest with you, it's not like we've never built power lines in the Sandhills. I was observing the 115,000 volt line as we were landing at the airport, and it's in there. We patrol that line every year. We maintain that line. I can tell you that this one was going right through an area. There weren't any roads around it. We know how to deal with that. We've got the equipment to deal with that, and we have no desire to not get along and work well with landowners. I mean, we're in a relationship with these folks for a long time. And I think if you go out and you talk to landowners who have worked with NPPD for years, they've got transmission lines on their property, and they might not have even wanted that line there in the first place. But I think if you got a fair assessment from all those folks, you would hear a lot of good things about how our line crews bend over backwards to make sure that we do things right and that we don't cause any other issues.
Yeah, we're kind of running out of time. You want to talk a little bit about the Muddy Creek? Slip that in there real quick?
Yep, got a Muddy Creek between the Muddy Creek substation and Ord. Muddy Creek is down by, help me out exactly.
Just north of Broken Bow.
North of Broken Bow. Again, this is going to address voltage and loading issues. You guys have just got so much load growth up here. What are you doing up here, Dave?
I don't know, Pat, because I was just reading the other day that Nebraska's lost 420 some farms this past year. But the demand for electricity continues to grow because it's just a different way of doing things.
That's right.
Yeah.
We might have lost the individual farms, but the ground's still being farmed. I do want to let people know that we're going to have open houses for that project to talk about some alternate routes that have been identified. On March 24th, we'll be at the Broken Bow City Auditorium from 2 until 8 p.m. And then on March 25th, we're going to be in Ord at the exhibit hall at the Valley County Fairgrounds, also from 2 to 8 p.m.
Okay, we are a little over time, which we don't mind here so much. But I don't want to.
My rate goes up.
Yeah. Rick is going to be.
Rick's footing the bill for this one.
I don't like being a rat, and Bob, you know this. I don't like being a tattletale. But what is the gadget you have there, Pat?
An iPad?
Yeah, an iPad.
Yeah.
When Mark was here last time, he had one of those, and he had. You have this graph and so
Yeah.
forth. He had Looney Tunes on.
Did he
it.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been working hard to get him back in alignment, and it is a
I
challenge.
just thought you'd want to know. I'm
I
not trying to be a
appreciate it.
tattletale.
Is that an Ohio thing?
It might be,
Yeah.
especially after last night. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, it is so good to have you back, and you're always welcome to come. I'm glad Rick got you here and got you in the studio.
We've got 3 or 4 more topics that we're been able to get to. So.
Yeah,
And Dave, I want to congratulate you again on being Citizen of the Year.
thank you.
Pretty impressive.
Thank
So-
you, and thanks for the card.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
really amazed me, and because we're now buddies,
Yeah.
even though in 74 we went separate ways, didn't
Yes, we did.
we kind of, our frame of mind changed. I would like to give you a product from the 1970s,
Really?
clove gum for you.
Will I
What a moment.
fail a drug test if I take this?
Not this particular package.
Hey, it's not like I'm giving you something.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Pat, I wanted to make a comment because I think the big, huge difference here between NPPD and a private commercial business beholding to stockholders, it makes it much easier to trust when you come, you want to build a line through the Sandhills, knowing that you're not out to make a buck for the stockholders. I think that is a huge difference. The trustworthiness.
It is. You know,
coming
this
into play
is by Nebraskans for Nebraskans. This is not so that some stockholder-owned company can earn a return on an investment. That is not what this is about. And quite frankly, Nebraska's blessed with being the only all-public power state in the union, and we should hang on to that.
I think
Absolutely.
that's exactly what the point is, very trustworthy in that respect, because you're not beholden to stockholders.
And Dave, I'm apparently beholden to. Now he's giving me a
Yeah,
piece of gum. so-
you don't realize what that gum had. There's some strings attached to
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Hey, that's clove, dude. I mean,
Jeez. Is it actual gum from 1974 though?
no,
It's gonna be a little hard to chew. isn't it?
But a true story, Mark. My wife's a member of the Teammates program. I'm just familiar with that. And she has a young man that she goes up and sees once a week. She's just having a blast with it. And they put out this retro gum every once in a while, and so she bought some, and she took it up and gave him a stick, which he saved where he was going to get it on the bus because you're not supposed to chew gum in school. But he says, he looked at it and he goes, he smelled it. He says, man, that smells really good. He says, there's 2 wrappers on it. Well, if you look nowadays, you don't have that. But back in the day, you
Back
had
in
the
the day,
inside
you did.
wrapper and then you had the paper wrapper
Oh,
on
yeah.
the outside. So he was like thrilled. And I think he was as happy as Pat is about it. I'm not sure.
Hey, you know, 1974, I don't want to bust your bubble, but I was kind of a Juicy Fruit fan.
Oh,
Back in
yeah.
74.
You could have at least been a beachman or something, you know? Hey, thanks, guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. News.